Your alarm is set for 7 o'clock. You open your eyes. You lie there for a second, confused, then reach for your phone, already annoyed at yourself for waking up before the one device in your life that's specifically paid to do that job. 6:58. 2 minutes early. You tell yourself it's nothing. Bad dream. Weird angle on the pillow. Too much water before bed. Except it happens again the next morning. Alarm set for 7 o'clock. Eyes open at 6:59. And the morning after that, same story, different minute. Always early, never late. You've never once slept straight through your alarm and woken up confused at 7:04, wondering where the extra time went. It only ever runs one direction. Something inside you is quietly counting down to a number you told a phone app, not your own body. And somehow it's better at hitting that number than the actual alarm sitting 6 inches from your face. The alarm needed a battery, a working speaker, and you not accidentally muting it at 2 a.m. while half asleep. Whatever's doing this inside you needed none of that, and it's never once needed charging. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what that something is, where it physically sits inside you, and why it's been running since long before humans had a word for morning, let alone an alarm to beat. We're going to look at a 1999 sleep lab in Germany that caught it red-handed. A scientist who spent months alone in a cave to test his own body clock, a cluster of 20,000 neurons that keeps perfect time in total darkness. 3 hunter-gatherer societies on 3 different continents who wake up together without a single clock between them, and a brand new 2025 study that walks back part of the story, on purpose, because that's what real evidence does when it's allowed to keep working. Let's start at the very beginning. Here's what everyone assumes, because it's the only explanation anyone's ever actually bothered giving you. You're just a light sleeper. Your body is sensitive, easily disturbed, and it happens to notice the last few minutes before the alarm the same way it'd notice a car door slamming outside. Or it's anxiety. Some overprotective corner of your brain is terrified of oversleeping, so it keeps one eye cracked open all night, like a babysitter who's had too much coffee, and jolts you awake a minute early just to be safe. Or the boring one. It's not even real. It's survivorship bias. You don't remember the hundreds of ordinary mornings the alarm actually did its job and woke you up cold, because nothing about those mornings felt worth remembering. You only remember the handful of times you beat it, because that's the version of the story that feels like it means something. 3 explanations: light sleeper, anxious brain, selective memory. All 3 sound reasonable enough to repeat in a group chat. All 3 get repeated constantly by that one friend who's read exactly one article about sleep and now considers himself a hormone specialist, or by a wellness account that posts the same 6 facts on a loop with slightly different fonts. And all 3 share the same fundamental problem. Nobody who says them has ever actually measured anything. They're vibes wearing a lab coat, confident, well-meaning, occasionally accessorized with a citation that turns out to be another Instagram post. Here's the version that's actually been measured, in an actual lab, with actual blood draws, and it's stranger than any of the 3 explanations above, because it means your body isn't guessing at all. It's counting. But here's the thing nobody tells you. In 1999, a team of researchers at the University of Lübeck in Germany ran an experiment that makes light sleeper and anxious brain both look almost insultingly simple. Led by a researcher named Jan Born, the team told sleeping volunteers what time they'd be woken up, sometimes 6 a.m., sometimes 9 a.m., and tracked their hormones through the night with blood draws. What they found wasn't a vague sense of alertness. It was a specific, measurable spike of ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, the hormone that triggers your body's cortisol release, showing up in the bloodstream roughly 1 hour before the exact time volunteers had been told they'd be woken. Not 1 hour before some fixed biological cutoff. 1 hour before the specific number a researcher had said out loud to them the night before. And when the researchers lied, told a volunteer one time, then actually woke them at a different one, the hormone spike followed the number they'd been told, not the number that actually happened. Let that sink in for a second. Your endocrine system was tracking a promise made in words, hours earlier, while you were completely unconscious, and hitting it on schedule like it had circled the date on a calendar you never saw. That's not a light sleeper. That's not anxiety. Anxiety doesn't know what time it is, and it definitely can't do arithmetic in its sleep. This is a biological process running something close to a countdown timer, quietly handling an hour of internal prep work before your alarm ever makes a sound, getting your body ready for the exact moment you asked it to wake you, down to the hour, the same way a smart oven preheats itself before you actually push the button. So the real question isn't, why do you wake up a minute early? It's, what, physically, inside you, is capable of counting down to an appointment nobody ever wrote on paper. The paper is called Timing the End of Nocturnal Sleep, published in Nature in 1999, and the team behind it, Born, along with Hansen, Marshall, Malla, and Fem, didn't stop at people can sense time while asleep. They wanted to know what physically was doing the sensing. Here's how the setup worked. Volunteers went to sleep in the lab, knowing they'd be woken at a specific hour. Sometimes told the truth, sometimes deliberately misled. Researchers drew blood samples through the night to track ACTH, the hormone your pituitary gland releases specifically to kick cortisol production into gear. In the group correctly told they'd be woken at 6 a.m., ACTH began climbing at almost exactly 5 a.m., a full hour of hormonal preparation, building toward the moment before anything external ever signaled it was time. Then came the deception condition, which really closes the case. Volunteers told they'd be woken at 9 a.m., but actually woken at 6 a.m., still showed ACTH curves that followed the 9 a.m. story, not the real one, meaning their bodies were tracking the expectation they'd been given, not some fixed internal countdown ticking toward the true event. Swap the story, and the hormone spike moves with it, obediently, like it's taking dictation. That's the detail that turns this from interesting into borderline unsettling. This isn't a rigid biological alarm running on autopilot. It's closer to a system that takes in information, a spoken number, hours in advance, and calculates backward from it, adjusting itself the moment the input changes. The way a GPS recalculates the second you miss a turn. Your sleeping brain was doing arithmetic based on something someone told it out loud, the same way you'd set a mental reminder before dozing off on a long flight. Except your sleeping brain never once needed a second reminder. Nobody in 1999 fully explained the wiring behind it, and honestly, nobody fully has since. But the finding itself has held up, replicated and cited for over 2 decades. Tell a sleeping person a wake-up time, and their body starts preparing for it roughly an hour ahead of schedule, whether that time turns out to be true or not. Somewhere behind your closed eyes, something is quietly running the math on a number you only said out loud once, hours earlier, half asleep, and it's still getting the answer right in the morning. Which raises an obvious follow-up. If just being told a number can trigger a countdown, what's actually running the countdown itself? That countdown isn't a one-off lab curiosity. It's connected to something with its own name in sleep science, the cortisol awakening response, or CAR, and it's one of the most heavily studied hormone patterns in the entire field. Here's the shape of it. In the first 30 to 45 minutes after you wake up, any morning, alarm or not, your cortisol level jumps by roughly 50 to 75%. And this is the detail that matters. It's not just the tail end of your normal daily cortisol rhythm, which does climb gradually through the morning anyway. CAR is a separate, extra spike sitting on top of that rhythm, specifically tied to the act of waking, distinct enough that researchers can measure it apart from the rest of the day's hormone curve. It's been studied since the late 1990s, in hundreds of papers across dozens of countries, and by now, it's used as an actual diagnostic tool, a biomarker pulled out in psychiatry and stress research, because how sharp or blunted that morning spike is tells clinicians something real about a person's nervous system. It's reliable enough that researchers can compare it across completely different studies, different labs, different continents, and still see the same basic shape show up. We'll come back to that, because it matters more than it sounds like right now. For today's purposes, here's the piece that connects back to the Lübeck experiment. CAR isn't random, and it isn't purely reactive either. It's not simply your body responding to daylight hitting your eyelids, because it shows up reliably, even in a pitch-black room, with the blackout curtains doing their one job perfectly. It's anticipatory, tied to expectation, layered on top of a rhythm that was already building before you opened your eyes. In other words, the ACTH spike Bourne's team measured an hour before wake time isn't an isolated party trick. It's the opening act of a well-documented hormonal response that sleep researchers everywhere have independently confirmed exists. So, there's a specific anticipatory extra hormone spike tied to waking, sitting on top of your regular daily rhythm, confirmed across decades of research, in labs that never coordinated with each other, and kept landing on the same answer anyway, which begs a slightly different question than why, namely, where physically is the part of you actually keeping the time? The physical answer sits in a cluster of brain cells about the size of a grain of rice, called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, SCN for short, tucked in the hypothalamus, right above the point where your optic nerves cross. It's made of roughly 20,000 neurons, split about 10,000 to a side, and it functions as the master clock for essentially every rhythmic process in your body: hormone release, body temperature, digestion, and yes, the timing of when cortisol should start climbing before you wake. Here's the part that proves it doesn't actually need daylight to work. In the 1960s and 70s, a French scientist named Michel Siffre ran a series of experiments on himself, living alone in caves for weeks and eventually months at a time, completely cut off from sunlight, clocks, and any information about what time it was on the surface. No schedule, no sun, no idea what day it actually was, and his body kept time anyway. Not perfectly. His cycle drifted slightly longer than 24 hours, closer to 24 and a half, but it stayed remarkably consistent, day after day, entirely on its own, for months at a stretch, with a research team on the surface monitoring him remotely and comparing notes he had no access to. He'd wake, eat, work, and sleep on a steady internal rhythm his SCN was generating from the inside, with zero outside information available to correct it. At one point, he lost track of the date so completely he genuinely believed fewer days had passed than actually had. His sense of the calendar drifted, but the underlying biological rhythm itself kept ticking with startling regularity, like a watch nobody remembered to reset, running fine long after the owner stopped checking it. That's the organ behind everything in this video. 20,000 neurons, sitting in the dark, literally and figuratively, running a self-sustaining countdown that doesn't require sunlight, doesn't require a phone, and, per the Lübeck data, apparently doesn't even require you to be conscious to take in new information and recalculate. Which raises the next obvious question. Does this thing actually work outside a controlled lab? In real life? For people who've never heard of an alarm clock at all? Short answer, yes. And the data backing it up comes from 3 continents at once. In 2015, a team led by Gandhi Yetish and Jerome Siegel published a study in Current Biology tracking sleep continuously, with actual wearable monitors, not surveys, in 3 societies with no access to electric light at all: the Hadza in Tanzania, the San in Namibia, and the Tsimane in Bolivia. No alarms, no phones, no posted schedules, no group chat saying, let's all get up around 6. And still, within each of these groups, people woke up within minutes of each other, morning after morning, across weeks of continuous monitoring, like a household full of roommates who never needed to discuss a wake-up time out loud, because something else was already handling it for all of them. That alone is worth sitting with. This isn't one especially disciplined person in a village setting an example everyone else scrambles to follow. It's an entire population, spread across huts, tents, and open camps, arriving at consciousness within a tight window of each other, night after night, without a single mechanical device involved anywhere in the process. No apps, no roosters on payroll, nothing. And it wasn't a fluke week either. The researchers tracked this across different seasons, in 3 completely unrelated cultures that have never met each other, speak different languages, and live thousands of miles apart on different continents entirely, which makes the synchronization itself the actual headline. You'd expect some drift, a few late risers, a few early ones, the normal human spread you'd see in any office on a Monday morning. Instead, night after night, the group moved together, as if something outside any individual's control was setting the schedule for everyone at once. Which brings up the obvious next question, and it's the same one a sleep researcher would ask. If it's not a machine doing the synchronizing, and it's clearly not random, what specifically out there in the physical world is handing 3 unrelated cultures on 3 different continents the same signal at roughly the same moment, night after night? The obvious guess is sunrise, and the obvious guess is almost right, just not for the reason you'd expect. I saved this one for last, because it's the part that reframes everything else in this video. When Yedish and Siegel's team dug into exactly what the wake-up moment was tracking, it lined up less with brightness and more with temperature. Specifically, the point in the night when the outdoor temperature stopped dropping and started climbing again, which typically happens shortly before the sky itself actually lightens. Think about what that rules out. If the trigger were simply, it's light now, a cloudy, overcast morning should regularly throw the timing off. Dimmer light, later signal, later wake up. Some mornings, people sleeping in by 20 minutes because of cloud cover. That's not what the data showed. The synchronization held steady across different weather and different exact sunrise times, tracking the temperature curve instead, which behaves far more predictably from night to night than how bright it happens to look through cloud cover. It's a strange thing to sit with. The moment your body chooses to end the night might be keyed less to your eyelids and more to your skin, or to some internal thermal sensor, reading the world the way a thermostat does, quietly, in the dark, well before your eyes get involved in the decision at all. And here's where it loops back to the very first fact in this video. The Lübeck team showed your body can start prepping for a wake-up time it was simply told, hours in advance, with no external cue at all. The Hadza, San, and Simane data shows a population-wide version of essentially the same skill, running off a real-world signal instead of a spoken sentence. Different input, same underlying trick. A body quietly counting down toward a moment, before that moment has technically arrived. Which means the something from the very start of this video was never really about your phone, or your bedroom, or your particular sleep habits. It's a genuinely ancient piece of biological machinery, and it apparently still works exactly the way it always has. Light, temperature, or a promise made out loud the night before, whichever input happens to be available. Now, let's be honest about something, because this video would be irresponsible if it wasn't. In January 2025, a team at the University of Bristol did something worth taking seriously. They ran continuous automated blood sampling, not spot checks, continuous, on 201 people, published in Proceedings of the Royal Society B, and found that the act of waking up itself does not on its own speed up cortisol release. Their own words, awakening did not result in an increase in cortisol release. What looks like waking triggers a hormone response may actually just be the tail end of a rise that was already underway for hours beforehand, as part of your normal daily rhythm, not a fresh burst caused by the specific moment your eyes open. That doesn't erase everything you just heard. It sharpens it. The Lübeck anticipation effect and the SCN's ability to keep time in total darkness are still solid, independently replicated findings. This newer study isn't arguing your body can't anticipate a wake-up time. It's arguing specifically against the idea that the physical act of opening your eyes is what causes the cortisol spike. The rise was probably already happening, quietly, for hours, while you were still fully asleep and had no idea any of it was going on. Waking up just happens to be the moment you become conscious enough to notice it, which is a little humbling, honestly, given how much credit waking up was getting. So take the anticipation story as strong evidence that something inside you is counting, and take this newer study as a genuine, current correction to exactly which part of the process the counting shows up in. That's not the science flip-flopping. That's what it looks like when researchers keep checking their own work, instead of just repeating the same fact for 25 years because it sounded good the first time. Here's the part that's less charming. Doctors already use this exact mechanism as a diagnostic tool, and not for anything pleasant. That cortisol awakening response from earlier, the 50 to 75% spike in your first waking minutes, isn't just a neutral biological quirk. Its shape is a genuine biomarker, an unusually sharp spike, or one that's gone strangely flat and blunted, is one of the patterns researchers look for in chronic stress, depression, and burnout. That's worth sitting with. The same internal alarm clock that quietly impresses you at 6:58 in the morning, the one anticipating your wake-up time an hour in advance, the one that apparently still tracks temperature the way your hunter-gatherer ancestors' bodies did, is also in the background, continuously reporting on how worn down your nervous system actually is. It doesn't clock out after doing the impressive part. It's on duty the whole time, and clinicians have learned to read what it's saying. An unusually blunted CAR shows up, again and again in the research literature, in people dealing with long-term burnout, the kind that comes from months or years of insufficient recovery, not one bad week and a rough Monday. Depression research points in the same direction. It's not that a flat morning cortisol curve causes those states on its own. It's that the same internal system, finely tuned enough to count down to a spoken wake-up time, is also sensitive enough to register when something in your life has been quietly wrong for a long stretch, long before you'd think to describe it that way yourself. So the next time your alarm clock loses to your own body by a minute, it's worth remembering that the same mechanism doing that party trick is also the one your doctor would, in a more serious context, want to actually measure. Not just a fun fact about ancient biology, a live readout running every single morning on exactly how you're actually doing, whether you asked for the report or not. Let's zoom all the way out. Long before there were alarm clocks, before there were mechanical clocks of any kind, before anyone had numbered the hours of a day, waking up on time wasn't a productivity habit. It was a survival requirement. Every single ancestor you have, going back further than agriculture, further than fire, further than language itself, needed to be alert before the world around them demanded it, before predators moved, before the group needed to leave camp, before the temperature itself shifted enough to matter. That pressure built a body that didn't wait passively for morning to simply arrive and announce itself. It built a body that anticipates, that takes in a cue, whether it's a falling then rising temperature curve, or, apparently, a sentence spoken out loud the night before, and starts preparing itself in advance, not reacting, preparing. That's a fundamentally different kind of system than sleep until interrupted, and it's been running, essentially unchanged, since long before anyone needed to be conscious for a 9 a.m. meeting. The alarm clock didn't create this ability, it just gave it a new job. The way a guard dog that used to watch for wolves now mostly just barks at the mail carrier. Same instinct, smaller stakes. For most of human history, this system was reading sunrise, temperature, and the rhythms of a group of people who all needed to move together. Now it reads a number you typed into a phone before bed, and it still runs the exact same hour of quiet internal preparation it would have run 50,000 years ago, whether the thing waiting for you outside is a predator or a commute. That pressure never went away just because you own a phone with a snooze button. It just changed what it's preparing you for. Tomorrow morning, you'll open your eyes a minute early again. That's not a coincidence. And it's not a flaw in your sleep. It's a nucleus of 20,000 neurons, running a countdown it started an hour ago without asking your permission, using a system old enough to have kept perfect time for ancestors who never once owned a clock, in a cave, on a savanna, or on a mattress you're currently still lying on. You didn't beat your alarm. Something inside you clocked out early on purpose, the same way it would have on a cold morning 50,000 years before alarms existed at all, back when the only thing waiting outside wasn't a commute, and being a minute early actually mattered. That's a clock older than clocks. If this changed how you think about the last minute before your alarm, subscribe. We post one deeply researched video like this every day.